With the world once again thrown into war, the U.S. 1st Infantry Division is called into service. With regiments dating back to the American Revolution, it is the oldest continuously serving division in the United States Army. Known as the Big Red One for their distinctive arm patch, the Fighting First set sail from New York to the United Kingdom in early August 1942 to begin their training for the Second World War. Under the watchful eye of Major General Terry Allen, the division commander, the Fighting First was kept busy, preparing for their first taste of combat.
You could make like a bazillion jokes about how Call of Duty has gone so far off the rails that it's almost unrecognizable. In a world where the most recent Battlefield 6, which focused more on hyper-realism, is making people question how come Call of Duty lets you play as Beavis and Butthead shooting alien ray guns with green goo, it's easy to say that Call of Duty not only lost its roots, they are located on another planet entirely. While entries like Call of Duty World War II were somewhat of a throwback to the classic days, it's safe to say that Call of Duty shifted away from being a historical shooter and more of a multiplayer cash cow for Activision to squeeze every single penny out of the diehard fans of this franchise. As someone who's in their 30s, I know I'm old as hell. It's kind of strange to see the franchise turn into what it has. Call of Duty became something so far removed from what I remember it to be, and it's kind of sad in a way. I can't say I'm a huge fan of the direction it's taken, but to be fair, I'm probably not the target audience, or maybe I just never was. I simply lack the time to dedicate to getting good enough to play online with any level of competence. A match online for me consists of getting murdered over and over by a bunch of people with lots of free time to dedicate to the game. I'm not going to argue on whether or not modern Call of Duty is good or bad, because that's more of a subjective matter. And honestly, I doubt there's any argument I could make that I would be able to convince anyone to change their opinion on it. The only thing I am going to say is that which I've already said, and that is that it is different from what it began as. I don't think anyone can objectively deny that. Call of Duty had far more humble beginnings though, as a historical military shooter about World War II on the PC, OS X, and the N-Gage? The very first Call of Duty was actually a PC-focused game back then. It wouldn't even release on consoles for another 6 years as Call of Duty Classic. Call of Duty would only actually get its first console versions with the spin-off games of the original Call of Duty called Call of Duty Finest Hour on PlayStation 2, Xbox, and Gamecube, and then with Call of Duty 2 also getting a spin-off game which we'll be talking about today called Call of Duty 2 Big Red 1. A lot of people wouldn't even know that Call of Duty actually had a ridiculous amount of spin-off games on virtually every device you could possibly imagine. Call of Duty as a franchise has grown to a point where it's hard to imagine a single military shooter could have spawned all of this, but I guess it goes to show you that you'll never know what will become popular in the future. The franchise has definitely strayed far from its humble beginnings, and I could likely do an entire video just talking about the history of these games, but I'm not versed enough on all of them to do them justice. But there are many other channels that do that in excessive detail. Call of Duty isn't going anywhere anytime soon, for better or for worse. For a brief moment though, let's forget all of that though, and go back to 2005, where the only games that existed were Call of Duty 2, and 2 spin-offs, Finest Hour, and the one we're talking about, no pun intended, Big Red 1. Now, I should preface this video with the fact that I'm not a history buff, nor am I a World War II enthusiast. So a lot of this info I'm using for this video was through research I did for the sake of the video, or what I asked my friends who are really into World War II history. I'm not as versed on military culture or systems as I myself have not served in the military, so I apologize for any info that I get wrong or leave out. I want to make damn sure though that before I go into this video, that I acknowledge the fact that games based upon World War II or any other historic war are in fact based upon real wars where millions of people lost their lives. And while it's fun to play these games, we should take a moment to remember that many people lost their lives and we should pay our respects to them. World War II was one of the bloodiest wars in human history, and one of the largest losses of life at a single time in recent history. And because of that, I owe it to those that died and those who are currently serving the military to try and give this video the proper historical context, and make sure I get as many details right as I can. If I do miss some stuff, please know that it's not intentional and I mean no disrespect. The last thing I want to do in my videos is disrespect servicemen and women who have gave their lives protecting the lives of other people. I don't usually have segments in a video like this and I try to stay away from controversial topics, but given the nature of the game, I felt it inappropriate not to bring this up and pay some kind of respect. There are millions of men and women who don't make it home after serving in combat, and it's very tragic, and it's something that we should not take for granted. Personal history for me now. My brother actually got this game in the Gamecube back in the day. I'm pretty sure it's the first Call of Duty that he and I both played. And I have to say, it's kind of funny how many of my videos ended up being the games that he indirectly introduced me to. It's interesting too, because my brother is the kind of guy that really is only interested in a small handful of games, but when he is, he usually finds ones that are oddly fascinating and fun. I'm pretty sure I mentioned this in my second Sight video that was also a similar situation with that game too. Anyway, regardless, here is Call of Duty 2 Big Red 1 on the Gamecube. There's really no way around it. A lot of first-person shooters of this time period suffered from too much brown syndrome. A lot of levels are just very brown and color lacking, and if you're used to more modern games, I can see why this would be a huge turnoff. But don't let the lack of colors fool you, because outside of its color lacking design, Big Red 1 is actually a very nice looking game for the time period, boasting fairly realistic looking environments that are all rooted in reality. The game design is intended to look much like the sections of Europe and South Africa where it takes place, and it does an excellent job at that. When you look at Call of Duty now and see Nicki Minaj with a pink Humvee, it's actually somewhat refreshing to go back and see the game looking like it actually takes place in a real battlefield, and not something out of an advertiser's wet dream. That's really the biggest issue with modern Call of Duty that a lot of people have. It's less about substance and more about whatever makes advertisers big money.
We've got to have money.
If the series had started milking people for money as hard as it does now back in PS3 and Xbox 360 days, I'm sure there would be a gun that shoots Mountain Dew and Doritos back then. Before online play introduced the franchise to the concept of over-monetization, there was a heavier focus on single-player experiences, and Big Red 1 is a great example of that. It has real historical context and enemies that are rooted into that context. Opponents will use flanking techniques, grenades, and various war tactics that were common at the time. Combat is exhilarating and exciting, split up with amusing narrative segments that give you the vibe of being actually in the battlefield. Call of Duty popularized the aim-down sights, or ADS gunplay mechanic, which is more similar to the actual firearm combat. Hip shooting is far less accurate and hard to even get on target. The idea is that ADS forces the combat to slow down so that gameplay is far more suitable on consoles where controllers aren't nearly as fluid as mouse and keyboard. But it doesn't make the combat feel slow or tedious in the slightest. Intense firefights make combat feel real and interesting. You never really feel like you're just shooting at mindless targets very long, as the gameplay is split up into several different segments where you take control of tanks, anti-air guns, gunner pits, and more. You get a real taste of all the types of combat that the Second Great War had to offer, and you walk away feeling like you got a good taste of everything. There's tons of historical weapons, such as some of my personal favorites, like the MP40 and the M1 Garand, giving you a choice how to approach your combat situations. I don't really think I need to go over how Call of Duty's weapons and combat systems work, as I'm pretty sure this series is so universally understood in how its gameplay works that even people who don't play Call of Duty understand how Call of Duty works, given that so much of its gameplay was borrowed by other games. But I'll go over briefly some of the chief mechanics that it popularized. Call of Duty was the franchise that really made the two-weapon system popular. The idea is simple: you can only carry two weapons at a time, intended to be far more realistic than other FPS games at the time, which allowed you to carry virtually every single type of weapon in the game all at once, along with enough ammo to wipe out half the population of whatever unfortunate place you end up at. Call of Duty, and by extension Big Red 1, reeled that back to the realm of non-fantastical, in that you're limited in what you can actually carry. And while later entries in the series definitely reduce your carry capacity even further, Big Red 1 still feels like it gets it just right. This was the time period where shooters were leaning away from the player being an unstoppable badass that kicked ass, saved babes, and took literal dumps in aliens' necks before blowing their heads off, and went the route of being a more realistic soldier with limitations that had to be adhered to. Characters like Caleb from Blood could take out a few sticks of dynamite to the face and keep trucking, albeit with significantly less health, but soldiers in Call of Duty would be taken down for the count from a well-placed grenade. This is possibly likely where we get the term cover shooter from, as Big Red 1 and other games in the franchise are all about reducing the amount of your body visible to the enemy by hiding behind cover and taking them out, ducking when it's time to reload rather than side strafing while banging in a new magazine like other games of the time. While it might be considered a slower paced shooter by some, it's still a rewarding and engaging one, but perhaps mindless at times. There is no looking for puzzle solutions or finding keys to unlock doors, and little the way of exploring. The focus is all on combat, and that's not inherently a bad thing, but I suppose it can get a little old toward the end of things. Fortunately though, these games in general don't usually overstay their welcome. Campaign-wise, Big Red 1 is not an exception to that rule either, as the campaign might only take you about 6 hours to finish if you're halfway decent. Though I do admit some of the checkpoints are decent stretches, and death means we're doing the same annoying part over and over sometimes. As for the music, it's fitting for the theme. Lots of standard military drums and trumpets, but what more did you expect? Now let's talk about controls. The controls feel really tight, and that's saying something because the Gamecube C-Stick is not exactly a proper joystick. I think that's part of why Call of Duty has so much staying power, is because at the end of the day, these games really do have tight controls that feel good. I think that's the reason why these games get so much hate later on though, is because how many games tried to emulate them, but not doing nearly as well. But that's just a theory of mine. Still, these games are fun, even if they have long since jumped the shark, gone off the rails, and been loaded with microtransactions. It's still a good time to pop in one of the originals and forget all about that, to go back to simpler times. Time where things were so much easier. This part of the video is going to be fairly lackluster because, well, it's a historical shooter and the story is basically just history, but I'll give you a brief history lesson here, I suppose. You play as Sergeant Roland Roger, a soldier of the 1st Infantry Division, one of the longest running infantry divisions in the United States Army, given the nickname Big Red 1 due to the appearance of their shoulder patch. Throughout the game, you fight through various real-world battles in North Africa, Sicily, and Western Europe. If you're a big history buff, I'm sure you'll have a lot to say about the historical accuracy or lack thereof sometimes. But I'm not a huge history guy myself, so I can't really comment on any level of accuracy. The story isn't really about you, and while your squad mates have their own personalities, I found myself never really focusing on them, instead focusing on the actual war, which might be the intent here. After all, shooters for a long time usually had enough story just to justify there being a game, so it's part of the norm. It's not like Half-Life where the story is deeply fleshed out, but then again it can't be, because it's based on real events. Given that the focus was keeping it true to what actually happened, it's not like I could go and do something fantastical or throw you any curveballs. But that's okay, the story has never really been the highlight of Call of Duty anyway, at least until you get to the more modern games where they have their own unique stories set in fictional wars that never actually happened. Yet. One thing that's really amusing throughout the game is they treated cutscenes that look like old news reports at the time using real stock footage of the actual war with world leaders at times. It does an excellent job of making you feel like everything's authentic and impressive for the time because remember, storage space on consoles is a huge factor to making games, and pre-rendered videos oftentimes would be crushed to absolute garbage quality to make them fit on the disc. Especially from the Gamecube, which had the smallest disc size of its competitors. Most games were only around 900 megabytes to 1 gigabyte in size, and only a handful of games were split into 2 discs, which most developers avoided because it was more expensive. The most well-known example probably being Resident Evil 4, and pretty much every Resident Evil that released on the Gamecube, I think. But I could be wrong, I know Resident Evil 0 had 2 discs. It may not be groundbreaking as far as the story goes, but that's okay, it's still a fantastic experience. Not every game can be Chrono Trigger after all. I love good story in game, but that doesn't mean a game needs to have a lot of story. Sometimes gameplay can overshadow everything else, and that's not a bad thing. I can think of many games that I've played even recently where the story was just so-so, but the gameplay was just excellent and overshadowed it. Naturally, it's Call of Duty, so I have to talk about multiplayer. But Big Red 1 didn't have online multiplayer on the Gamecube version, and since that's the version I'm using for this video, I can't really comment on it. That and the service for the other 2 versions has been shut down years ago as they were on the PlayStation 2 and Xbox original. So you're stuck to split screen, but that's part of the usual Call of Duty experience. There isn't a whole lot to talk about there because, well, the service is long gone like I said. And I don't have an original Xbox to use one of the modded Xbox online services that are made by third parties. So I couldn't really tell you how that's like. That and I don't know if anyone's still playing this online. And I'm pretty sure I don't think anyone really wants me to explain Call of Duty's multiplayer on this channel because I'm pretty sure it's well versed enough in every channel on the face of the sun to where you could get a good idea of how it works by looking at virtually any other video on the subject. It would make this video way too long to go into the nitty-gritty of its multiplayer, which has a very large competitive scene with many of the modern games. As for other extras, you do unlock concept arts for completing parts of the game, and it's cool, but there really isn't any kind of serious unlockables. So replay value relies entirely on if you enjoyed the game enough to replay it. Still, if you can get a few friends to play with you together at split screen wise, this is probably a lot of fun. Sadly, I don't have any footage of that because I don't have any friends. I've never really been a huge Call of Duty fan or a historical shooter fan, but I can say that this game was something special for me growing up, and it was a really fun game to come back to for a video. It may not be much compared to most of the modern Call of Duty games, but it's part of the series' roots and it deserves respect for that. Some might argue that Call of Duty began a trend in games to try and emulate it that led to the lack of creativity for years, but that doesn't mean the original games are bad. It just means people trying to knock them off just suck. It's very likely that I'll find myself revisiting this once again one day for nostalgia's sake, and that's okay with me. It's fun to go back after all. That's what this channel's all about, isn't it? Going back to the games of yesteryear and reminiscing. If you want to keep reminiscing though, you can check out some of my other videos. I do retrospectives like this one mostly on older or retro-inspired games, so if that's your thing, you may want to stick around. Subscribe if you want to see more videos like this one, and make sure to hit that notification bell so you're kept up to date on my latest videos. Also, I got a new microphone for this video, so I'm kind of testing out what settings are best for it, so let me know how that worked out. This is WizPlay, and that's enough of that.